In this webinar, we will explore several things. We'll talk about some of the different policy scenarios under a Trump administration and a Republican Congress. Excuse me, I've done something, there we go. Some of the different policy scenarios under a Trump administration and a Republican Congress. How will the Paris Agreement, the Green Climate Fund, and the Clean Power Plan fare? And how will climate change fare within departments and agencies in the next few years? And lastly, how can the Catholic community respond to the challenges ahead? So let me welcome and introduce our speakers. I'm going to begin with our first speaker first. Christina DeConcini is World Resources Institute's Director of Government Affairs, where she focuses primarily on overseeing WRI's legislative work and strategy on climate change and energy issues. She also represented WRI in the United States Climate Action Partnership and has spoken on these issues in a number of forums. Christina leads the WRI's Climate Impact Works, which works to amplify voices of local elected officials who are struggling to deal with impacts from climate change and who are working to develop greater resources for resiliency. Prior to joining WRI 8 years ago, she spent 20 years advocating for the rights of immigrants and refugees, serving as the Director of Policy and Advocacy in several national organizations, including serving as the Director of Advocacy for the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, also known as CLINIC. Christina has written and spoken frequently on issues related to climate change, as well as immigration and refugee policies. She has a law degree from Northeastern University in Boston, Mass., and an undergraduate degree from the University of California, San Diego. She lives in Bethesda, Maryland with her husband, and she has 3 children. Christina?
Hi, thank you very much, Maggie, and everyone for participating in this today. As Maggie mentioned, I worked for Clinic for several years, am familiar with Catholic social teaching and the engagement of the community on a number of issues. I'm Catholic myself, and through years of lobbying and advocacy, I know the power of your collective and individual voices. So I'm delighted in these pretty dark days that we're in to have been invited to participate in this. And we'll try to elucidate some areas where I think your engagement would really make a difference. There never has been more urgency for your collective voices to speak up for what is morally right and just on many issues, including climate change, clean air, and clean water. So with that, I'll start with the slides. And I want to say that I think the title of this webinar is very appropriate, of challenges and opportunities. And so with the first slide, we're going to focus on challenges, and then I'm going to move on to opportunities. It is the rhetoric and initial actions coming out of President Trump's presidency are not encouraging in any way, shape, or form. And it's hard not to be discouraged in this environment. We all know that he has said what he thinks about climate change and global warming, that it's a hoax, and he's not a big believer in it. So one could ask, is there any hope at all? And I would say, yes, there is. I don't want to overstate it, but I do want to point out some of the many examples where his rhetoric is more extreme than that of his nominees and where it contradicts itself. So there are a number of inconsistencies. But please don't misinterpret this. I am deeply troubled by the fossil fuel cabinet nominees he's put together. Nevertheless, these inconsistencies exist, and I think that they do provide an opening for influence strategies. I'm just going to point out a few of them because it would take hours to go through all of them. So on the director of the CIA, as people know, Trump has said that he is all in favor of waterboarding, and unfortunately just today or last night he reiterated that. Yet his nominee, who's going to be confirmed, Representative Mike Pompeo for the director of CIA, said, quote, absolutely no, when asked if he would support this or would reinstate or use waterboarding or any other enhanced interrogation techniques that fall outside the Army field manual. When he was asked if the president asked him to do that, would he do that? He said under no circumstances. So of course that's sort of a low bar, but at the same time it does raise the question of who is going to be in charge here. The people running the agencies who have experience with this, or the hot-headed President Trump. Likewise, there have been many reports of Trump seeking quick ways to withdraw from the Paris Agreement on climate change. But then he told the New York Times that he has an open mind about it. Later, Rex Tillerson, his nominee for Secretary of State, at his hearing said, "I think it's important that the United States maintain its seat at the table in the conversation on how to address threats to climate change. They do require a global response." So if you take him at his words, it doesn't seem that tearing up and pulling out of the entire Paris Agreement would be the actions they're going to move forward on, because there's no way to have a seat at the table if you've destroyed the table. I found out of all the fossil fuel nominees that he has put forward in the last couple of weeks, some of the remarks coming from Governor Rick Perry to be somewhat encouraging, despite his mediocre responses on the urgency to act on climate change. He said he would, quote, protect all of the science, whether it's related to climate or other projects, when asked. He repeatedly insisted that the U.S. states could expand their economies while cutting emissions. Citing his record as governor, Perry said, "I've seen the 12th largest economy in the world lower carbon emissions by 17%. That's real reductions that can make a difference in the environment and the world." And then he went on to say how doing so could give us a competitive advantage. This is quite encouraging because these are the facts, and it does show some disconnect between somebody who has governed and has seen that you can lower emissions and grow your economy. In fact, a recent brief from Brookings Institute showed that 33 U.S. states, including Texas, had decoupled economic growth from carbon emissions between 2000 and 2014. During this period, the Texas economy grew by 50.5% and emissions grew only by 1.1%. And as a whole, between 2008 and 2015, the U.S. economy grew by more than 10%, while carbon emissions fell by 9.5%. So those are some of the slivers of hope, or little tiny openings where it seems like there might be possibilities to engage and talk to people in this administration and persuade this administration to take less of a hard line on this. Now to some more bad news. On the first day, and there's so much of this that it's hard to know what to have chosen for this slideshow, because every hour it's breaking. And just as an aside, I work here in DC and work with lots of people that follow this closely, and I'm on calls on a pretty regularly basis with folks who really don't know what's going to be happening, because it's very new. As we know, we're only a week into this, and every day there's all sorts of new rumors and new announcements. And we don't actually have the cabinet in place yet to see what they're going to do for sure. So on day one, everyone knows that all mention of climate change was removed from the White House website. And he put up a very troubling statement on energy that said the following, quote, "President Trump is committed to eliminating harmful and unnecessary policies, such as the Climate Action Plan and Waters of the U.S. rule." As people know who have been following the news in the last few days, there's been numerous reports of EPA data being stripped off its website. And it does look like that there has been the outcry around that. They have backed down yesterday and said they're actually not going to be removing all that data. But all of that waits to be seen. Here's more things that we know are going to be threatened. The Clean Power Plan, which I know many of you spent many hours and worked very hard to support, is very likely to be directly threatened. as is the Climate Action Plan, and that's the quote on this slide is the one that I just read to you. At the Department of Energy, this slide shows a number of promises that have been made of rolling back different fundings and eliminating Office of Energy Efficiency and renewable energy and all sorts of other things that are necessary for us to continue to move in a low carbon direction. So that's some of the bad news. There's more, but I don't want to go overboard on that. So I want to move on to the topic of opportunities and opportunities for engagement. The question is, how can we move forward in such a dismal environment? And I don't have a silver bullet for that, but I would say that the faith community and the Catholic community in particular does have sway with some Republicans in a way that organizations like mine that work on the environment don't. And I think that you will have access and be able to get into offices and influence people in ways that others can't. So it is going to be incredibly important that you continue to engage as you have and step up the engagement to any degree that's humanly possible. The number one suggestion I have is not new, but it's really to mobilize grassroots and grass tops to weigh in with members of Congress as various threats emerge. Your voices are powerful. You have pews and networks and organizations full of people, and all of them are someone's constituents in Congress, and all of them have places that they can weigh in their voices on these matters. So I leave it to you to figure out how best to do that, but there is a lot of power there because it's a large church and a lot of people who are committed to this. And if the marches over the weekend are any inkling of what's going to come, perhaps people will become more mobilized under this new environment. Another suggestion is one that I know that has already taken place, but as this very large owner of buildings and property in the United States, there's ample opportunities for you as communities and property owners to walk the walk and really do dramatic moves in terms of energy efficiencies in your own buildings and maybe renewable energies as well. I think doing those kind of things really can model to people that there are things we can do to continue to move forward despite a bad policy environment. Some other areas, and by the way, this is not comprehensive. I am not claiming to list every single area that the Catholic Church and its affiliates and stakeholders could engage in. These are just some initial ideas, and I'm happy to discuss more on this. A few other areas are that I think would be very right for your particular voice to be heard in is around the Green Climate Fund, clean energy research, adaptation and finance issues, which are very similar to the Green Climate Fund, but go outside of that, and on infrastructure legislation. So I'll just say a couple things about the Green Climate Fund, but this really pertains to all of climate finance, not just that one particular fund. The faith community should and has had a very strong voice in protecting funding like this that goes to developing countries in helping them deal with climate change, climate impacts. In particular, the Green Climate Fund, and again, this really goes beyond just the Green Climate Fund because there's much other climate funding throughout USAID, provides vital support to clean development in poor and vulnerable countries, as well as increasing their ability to withstand extreme weather events. Recent projects have helped people deploy renewable energy in the Pacific Islands, have helped Uganda and Sri Lanka to cope with drought, and enable Rwanda and Kenya to roll out household solar energy. Your voices on this, because the Catholic Network does so much around the world, in helping the developing world move forward, is very important to try to explain to members of Congress that this helps countries get electricity, get out of poverty, but to do so in ways that will be sustainable for them and won't result in more pollution and more health hazards for their communities. The GCF also it focuses its adaptation spending on the least developed countries, and they do that across the board, and those that are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So the question might be, well, who do we ask and what do we ask of them? And again, it's impossible in a 20-minute presentation to go through every branch of every person in Congress, but there are some pretty obvious people and targets that jump out, especially around this finance question that I wanted to focus on. Because if we want to show that we're serious about our commitment to Paris, pulling back all of our finance and saying we're not going to help the least developed countries do anything to move in the direction is not going to serve us well. And all of you know how to make those arguments. But I think that it might be good to reach out to the key Republican members of the Appropriation Committee and to ask them both to not suspend the Green Climate Fund and also to support amendments from Democratic senators during that debate that may come forward to put this back in or to protect other flows of climate finance. And in particular, I would call out 3 Senate offices that would be really great to have huge amounts of weigh-in from your community and others. Senator Collins of Maine, she has voted the right way on these things recently in terms of giving finance to low-income countries around climate and resilience, and she needs reassurance that her past efforts are appreciated and that people want her to continue in that direction. She would be a very important target. Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina would also be a very good target. We know from a variety of things, is not happy with the way the Obama administration maneuvered into the Paris Agreement and other things, but he has in the past understood the impacts of climate change on destabilizing parts of the world and preserving this funding as a way to help that. And he's also been supportive of international aid to developing countries. And finally, on the Appropriations Committee, another Republican that would be worth focusing on is Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, given that she's going to have an empathetic ear towards the impacts, given that the Alaskan communities in her state are being hit in a big way, and she's quite articulate about that and knows about that. And that's just more of what's to come and what's already happening in the least developed countries that did not contribute to this problem, but are going to be at the brunt of dealing with it. So with that, I don't want to take up more time, and my last slide really isn't a joke. And it is that I do think it's important for all of us as a faith community to continue to pray that we can keep our cool during this time, but also that we can be strong and a voice for people who need our voice to move forward and not back down, and to pray that hearts can soften and change and miracles can happen. So with that, I'll wrap up for now. This is my contact information. I'd be more than happy to answer emails in addition to questions about this and talk further. I can't underscore enough that what I put forward is not comprehensive at all. It was just an attempt to sort of in 20 minutes put together some overall ideas. And since we're only a week into this, I'm sure next week I'll have additional ideas as new developments come forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Now, generally, I said that we were going to do the questions at the end, but in fact, we're going to, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, not the least of which is that could you list the names that you suggested people be in touch with, as well as their states? A couple of people have asked that question. If you could tell us what states those names that you had, and they specifically asked us to write down their names so we have them right, but we can handle that after the fact. If you'll...
So Senator Susan Collins from Maine. These are 3 Republicans who are on the Appropriations Committee who are they are likely targets that could be persuaded to not cut all climate finance across the board and just say we're not going to help any developing countries in this area. So Susan Collins from Maine is one. The second one is Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina. And the third one is Senator Lisa Murkowski from Alaska.
Thank you. Let me then move on to our next presentation, which is going to be given by the executive director, the founding executive director of the Catholic Climate Covenant, Dan Misleh. Now, Dan was supposed to be here live, but he was called away to a meeting, and so he has recorded a message to us.
Good afternoon, and thanks for joining this webinar. I'm especially grateful for Christina for taking the time to lay before us the challenges that we face with the new administration. As you can see, I'm not live. I'm somewhere over Europe, traveling to Italy for a meeting on divesting and investing in Rome, and then on to Assisi for a couple of days to help the global Catholic climate movement with their strategic planning for the year. So I hope you'll forgive me for not being available to take questions, but I'm sure that Maggie and Paz and the rest of the staff can help you as you ask some tough questions at a very difficult time. But let's get right to it. As Christina said, there's a new sheriff in town. And in many ways, he's likely to make our work a lot more difficult, as she outlined. But like you, I struggle to understand how Donald Trump became our new president and realize that I'm one of those Washington elites who really doesn't get it. Out of touch, I think, with so many of our citizens, and that's a shame. They seem to be yearning for change so much that they're willing to throw out political and social and cultural conventions and take a chance on a complete political novice who appealed to their sense of outrage and their feelings of being left behind in an increasingly globalized world. Whenever Mr. Trump was cornered during his long election, he would often double down on his rhetoric and stick to the path that was working for him, whipping up the crowds and repeating lines that worked. Build a wall, throw her in jail, destroy ISIS, bring back oil and gas, make America great again. The xenophobic America First agenda that he laid out had enough appeal in enough states to win himself the presidency. He's touching a raw nerve that we must come to understand and to listen to and find a way to help the country heal. We know he's not going to be a friend to the environment, God's creation, nor to those who suffer because of our neglect, the poor at home and abroad. The setbacks and rollbacks he's already put in motion will not be easily overcome, and I think Christina outlined those well. But my contention for years now has been that the facts on the ground, stronger storms, longer droughts, more property destruction and damage, huge sums spent on recovery, skyrocketing property insurance rates, these things will force our country to confront climate change. With the policy moves in the Obama administration, including the signing of the Paris Accords, the Clean Power Plan, the U.S. commitment to the Green Climate Fund, and other initiatives, I was hopeful that we were on a path towards a more sustainable future. All of this is now in doubt and under threat. But there is momentum beyond Washington that should give us reason to hope. And we need to remember that the sustainability train has left the station. There are 3 groups on board this train already, and probably many more. But I'd like to just kind of outline those for you. First is the military. Just today, this is Wednesday, not Thursday for me, there was a report out saying that the refugee crisis that climate change is likely to create and has already started will in some ways overwhelm, especially countries that are not that are already somewhat destabilized. The military sees climate change as a threat multiplier, and they're going to take that seriously, as they should. Another is the business community. They're seeing that sustainable practices are not only good for the bottom line, but for their public image. From Walmart to Google to mom and pop shops, businesses are taking up the challenge to clean up their environmental image, and to add to their bottom lines. And consumers are beginning to say that they want these things, so they're paying attention. And the final group, frankly, is us. And I think the faith community is more and more animated on these issues. Again, today, Wednesday, not Thursday, there was a poll that came out that says that Pope Francis in particular has had an impact on people's beliefs about climate change and how it has become a moral issue, not just a scientific issue. The fact that over some 700 some people that have registered for this webinar is a sign. It's a sign that we're all anxious to kind of move forward and to make a difference. From young evangelicals to mainline Protestants and Native peoples to our Muslim brothers and sisters, particularly the young people in each of these groups, there's a great push to recover the creation care traditions that are part of every religion and emanate from our creation stories themselves, that God created a beautiful universe and made humankind in God's image and likeness to care for this amazing garden. But let's return to our challenges. How do we keep the faith and move forward in an administration and Congress that are skeptical at best and openly hostile at worst to caring for creation and for our brothers and sisters? I'm going to suggest 3 strategies. The first is double down on our own rhetoric. I'll explain that in a minute. To act local and to build alliances, and to pray constantly. So doubling down. As I said earlier, every time Donald Trump got into trouble with his march to the White House, he didn't back down, but doubled down. While most of the values he holds are antithetical to the life of a Christian, it's hard to argue that he's inconsistent. As Catholic Christians, we should remember that we have values to promote. Values that promote human life and dignity, that care for the stranger, shelter the homeless, comfort the sorrowful, and show a love of the Creator by loving God's creation. I'm reminded of the Bishop's Faithful Citizenship document, where they say that our politics should be focused more on moral principles than on the latest polls, focus more on the needs of the weak than on the benefits for the strong, and focus more on the pursuit of the common good than on demands of narrow interests. While politicians from both sides of the political aisle regularly give lip service to these values, rarely do they act on them. When people are not feeling heard, we need to listen more. When rhetoric gets heated, we need to be voices of reason and calm. When language, gestures, tweets, and postings turn ugly and mean, we need to counter them with love, understanding, and principled responses. As the country becomes even more polarized, and it will become more polarized, I'm afraid, it will be up to us to seek the common good and to find common ground. Should not our churches be places where we come together to do this, to discuss our concerns and seek solutions based on our values? We may disagree about how to get there, but let's at least try. The antidote to hate is love. The antidote to violence is nonviolence. The antidote to woundedness is healing. Let's keep our hearts and minds focused on these things. Secondly, act local. Very little activity on climate change and the environment will be focused in Washington, except to try to resist some of the bad things from happening. So our discernment process as a covenant, as an organization, which includes our staff and partners, will be to try to figure out where our limited resources, our time and money, will be best spent. It's my view that much more can happen locally, and instead of building up big campaigns to resist the Trump administration at every turn, I think we need to consider seriously how we can live our values in concrete ways in our own communities. Large demonstrations of resistance, as we saw last Saturday, are very important, and I wouldn't want to diminish their value. But they're relatively easy one-offs designed to help ease our pain, feel solidarity with the larger community, and energize us for more action. So those things shouldn't be dismissed. But I believe that the really hard work is how do I talk to my pastor about this, about creation care, about climate change? How do I gather others in my own community to understand the challenges that we face together? And how do I organize my community to act in concrete ways? I know that some of these small efforts don't feel like they really make a difference, but they do. They really do. Many of you heard me say this before, but if just 5% of the Catholics in the United States would become engaged in the environmental question, we would be over 3 times larger than the entire U.S. membership of World Wildlife Fund. We urge you to take full advantage of our programs, the Feast of St. Francis program, the upcoming Earth Day program, our Creation Care teams, and all the other resources we have on our website, our videos, and so forth. But also those of partners like Catholic Relief Services who have created a number of wonderful stories about the impacts of climate change and what they're doing overseas. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops has excellent resources. And the inspiring witness of women in religious communities, nationally and locally, they also can help move us and help become and be partners in this effort. As you know, the Covenant has launched a new initiative called Catholic Covenant Energies. We are well on our way to a successful pilot project in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, and we're excited to tell you more as this unfolds. And while we'd like to expand it greatly across the nation, current funding levels will prohibit us from doing so. But I hope you will also consider how your own parish might benefit from the energy conservation efforts and do some simple things that make a difference, like motion sensors for lights, sealing up doors and windows, swapping out incandescent and fluorescent bulbs with LEDs, which are a lot less expensive to run, and there's often rebates and incentives from the local utility to help you do many of these things, and we can help you do that as well. And as you do these things, make some noise about it. Let your local paper know what you're doing. Let them know what you're up to, how much energy you're saving, why the project is important to the parish. And then, of course, fold into those efforts our education materials and show that the wider community that the Catholic Church is serious about living out the challenges of Laudato Si. Pardon me. Finally, I hope you take every opportunity to add your voice to the public debate. Sit down with your local, state, and federal lawmakers. Let them know how you feel about the environment from the perspective of the Catholic faith. Never be afraid to tap explicitly into your Christian values and Catholic values and how those motivate you to act and why you're doing what you do because of your faith. Please don't let an article or an op-ed in your city newspaper or other newspaper that you disagree with go unanswered. Write a letter to the editor. Write an op-ed to your local paper. Let them know how you feel about these things. Politicians read these LTEs. They read these letters to the editor. They read op-eds. They want to know what's going on in the community. Our voices need to be part of that debate. Finally, I would say always be centered in prayer. If you're anything like me, you tend to drop to your knees more often in times of need rather than in times of thankfulness. Now's a needy time. So let's follow our instincts with that. I think we need more than anything in our current cultural environment is to have people who are centered, people who are aware that God's in charge, and we are God's vessels to make the world a more whole and each other more complete. Each day must begin and end with an examination of how we might conduct our lives in a world that can be both dangerous and confusing, but it also can be beautiful and awe-inspiring. We need to lament the loss of species and weep at the pain and suffering of our brothers and sisters. But we also need to celebrate the little victories and be thankful for the opportunity to fully live our faith in this troubling time. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that while prayer is always necessary, it is perhaps more necessary than ever as we confront these global challenges. So let me close with one of my favorite prayers, the prayer of St. Francis. On the day after the election, I was on Facebook looking at how people were reacting to the election of Donald Trump. The only thing I felt I could post was this prayer, because it was the one thing that gave me solace as I was reading through the puzzlement and anguish and anger displayed by family and friends about the outcome of the election. So let me close with this prayer, and I hope that it offers you some perspective and some food for thought and some food for the journey ahead. So we pray. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. Thank you again for this time. Again, apologies for not being here in person. Please know that my prayers are with you. I will be in Assisi for a few days, and I am sure that I will sit in front of Francis's tomb. And you can be assured that my first prayer will be one of thankfulness for all that you do, for all that you are, for the work that you do on behalf of God's creation. I go with your love in my heart, and I hope you'll take my love into your heart as well as we face these challenging times. So, God bless you. Thank you, and keep up the good fight and pray hard. Amen.
Thank you so much, Dan, for those wonderful words. As I said, Dan's our founding executive director. He's been here for 10 years. And before that, he worked for the U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops for 3 years, and also for 11 years in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati Social Action Office. So you can imagine, for we who are on staff at Catholic Covenant, Dan Misleh is a great visionary who's been incredibly motivating for us as we continue this fine work. So let's get to the questions. Christina, are you still on board here?
Yes, I am.
Okay, well then, between you and me and Paz and maybe Wesley on our staff that all have ability to talk, we'll get these questions answered as best we can. The first question came through right after you talked about the confirmation of Rex Tillerson, and it asked this question about whether on Wednesday afternoon Kennedy and 3 others of his top officials resigned unexpectedly, and 4 State Department officials confirmed have also resigned. The Assistant Secretary of State for Administration, Joyce Ann Barr, Assistant Secretary for State for Consular Affairs, Michelle Bond, and Ambassador Gentry O. Smith, Director of the Office of Foreign Affairs, followed him out the door. All are career Foreign Service officers who have served under both Republican and Democratic administrations. Christina, do you have verification of that? I know that it's being reported in the Washington Post today.
So I don't know much more than I read the Washington Post article, and then I heard that CNN was reporting that they were fired rather than resigned. And I don't know if they were fired or resigned. So I don't know more than the Post article, which in either case, it does seem quite alarming that career service, that number of people would exit at one time. So it's a very bad sign, I would say, whether they resigned or they were fired, either one a bad sign. But I don't have any inside information beyond what I read in news.
Great. Well, Allison Hines from Indiana also wants to know, what does the Pope Francis have to say about this? She goes on to say she doesn't believe everything on the internet, but what does she have to say in regards to the president's policies on this? And Paz, if you have your mic turned on, or Wesley, feel free to join into this. Christina, maybe you have some things yourself, but I can tell you that in Laudato Si, the Pope talked a lot about integral ecology, and that he speaks often about the need for us to act on the common good, and that he speaks about how legislators need to move beyond short-term solutions. They need to move beyond making decisions that gain profit and look at the greater good. And so I don't have any particular quotes to tell you right now, but if you were to read Laudato Si on care for our common home, the Pope's encyclical letter, you will see that repeated time and time again. And he also calls on us as Catholics to influence our legislators and to remind them that we have an obligation to really respect the dignity of all human beings, and that we should not be legislating things that have an adverse effect on the health of our planet. So anybody else want to add to that? If not on our staff, then I will just, yep. Let me move on then. Let's see. Oh, there was a question about the April 29th march and whether or not Catholic Climate Covenant would be involved in that. For those of you who don't know this, on Saturday, April 29th, there is the People's Climate March. It's going to be in Washington, D.C., and they are expecting tens of thousands of people. It's a repeat of the climate march that happened in New York 2 years ago. And Catholic Climate Covenant will indeed be involved in we are not sponsoring it, but we have been asked for those of you who are Catholic or those who are concerned about the planet from a faith perspective. We're going to be doing lobbying training on Friday. We're really encouraging people to come in on Friday so that they have a chance. They can take a lobby training in the morning and then have a chance to actually meet with their legislative office members in the afternoon. Of course, Congress offices are not open on Saturdays, so to really make a difference in terms of the legislature, we encourage people to come in, take the training in the morning on the day before, on March 28th, and then make appointments to see your congressional representatives while you're there on Friday afternoon. And if the representatives are not available, then by all means set up appointments with their staff. They all have various staff members who handle various areas, and so one of those staff members who knows about climate change would be there. So the rest of the questions, I'm kind of scrolling down the questions. Judy Mullally from Nebraska asked, how should we address the concerns that scientists will be vetted by the White House? Christina, do you want to talk about that?
Yes, I think that I would refer people to the Union of Concerned Scientists, who's doing an amazing amount of work of tracking this and putting out talking points and papers on it. And I know they put something out earlier this week that I didn't have time to fully digest. But I think that this is going to be a really important thing to track and weigh in on once we have evidence of people's free speech being suppressed or people being told that they can't talk about science or those types of things. So I think it's going to be an important thing to watch and monitor. And I would direct people to the Union of Concerned Scientists. I think they're the best organization, that they're very, very focused on this and tracking this very closely. And that it will be a place where you can get talking points and updates on bringing these to the attention of your members of Congress too. And then when people are having hearings, it would be appropriate to weigh in with the members of the Senate that are in those committees on those hearings.
Great. And then the other thing that I would say is that today at noon, there was a Twitter storm that was announced so that today at noon, Twitter was alight and it was actually trending on the issue that fact is fact. And it's really disputing this issue that there are alternative facts or that climate change is not real. So there were, when I looked at it before we got started, there was over 43,000 tweets on the issue that fact is fact and that climate change is real. So that's another area where this is happening. So next question from Ken Ferris from Iowa. Do you anticipate one environmental justice issue making the short list of 3 that will be identified by the USCCB here in the next few weeks in lieu of the 3 issues we normally get at CSMG? Christina, I do have an answer to that. Do you have something to say in relation to that question?
I think it's very much directed towards you and what USCCB is going to put together as their priorities.
Yeah, I'm looking here real quick too. I know that USCCB is very much, they're working with Catholic Relief Services, and I just came from a meeting at the Bishops' Conference, and one of the things that's happening there is that I don't know that climate change in and of itself is going to be one of the 3 issues that the bishops are going to focus on, but there's several things that are going. If you check the U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops website, you will see that they are putting out press releases as quickly as executive orders are coming out. So bishops are making stands that are heads of various committees, speaking on behalf of all of the bishops. So they put out things about migration, they put out things about the pipeline, they put out things about all sorts of issues that are being addressed through the executive orders right now. And but they are also going to be doing some lobbying on the Hill And what they are doing is going line by line through the foreign aid budget. And they are looking at the foreign aid budget in terms of where they can find money for international monies that can go towards alleviating suffering, from mitigating the some of the people that have been more directly affected by climate change. So they're looking for, they know that there probably will not be legislation, federal legislation introduced or approved during this administration, but they are looking for other avenues to ensure that that we continue to help the most vulnerable, migrants, refugees, and people affected by climate change. That's kind of the word from the Bishops' Conference as of 1:30 today when I left there. So next question. The next question, oh, somebody just wanted us to make sure that we realize that there is a climate solutions caucus, and I actually, yes, there was. Okay, good, because right now it's gone up to 20, but go ahead, whoever's Paz, is that you?
Oh, that's me, Christina, DeConcini. Yes, that's a very positive development, simply because it's the only bipartisan anything in Congress on climate. And it's a bipartisan caucus that started in the House, and it does have 20 members of it now. And it would be a very useful, I could pull up, but I don't have it right in front of me, the members, but it's easy. You just put in Climate Solutions Caucus and it will come up immediately. It would be also great if anybody on this call is any one of those members' constituents, to absolutely weigh in and tell them, especially the Republicans, how wonderful it is that they're showing courage and breaking from kind of the stronghold and understanding that this is an issue that affects everybody and it has nothing to do with political party. It's quite interesting. I've met with several of the members of that caucus, and one of them in particular that I know is Carlos Curbelo from South Florida. And it is a case of the sea level rise being so extreme in the district that he's in that covers the Florida Keys, that there's nobody in his district, and he's a Republican, that doesn't think this is a pressing issue. And it's an example of when the climate impacts will suddenly trump the ideology, because it is such a pressing need for people and need to move forward. So I would recommend that people try, that's another avenue to engage with those members, call them, write them, tell them that you think it's great that they're engaging in this. And then if you're in a congressional district with a Republican, even if it's highly unlikely, which it probably is if the person's not receptive, you could also recommend that you would like to see them join this caucus to find solutions on a bipartisan basis to this problem that affects everyone, regardless of their political party.
Christina, we were talking about that too today at this meeting that I was at, and one of the things about it being even, it's 20 members, but it's 10 from the Republican Party, 10 from the Democratic Party, and the caucus has decided that they will continue to be even. So, so especially if you have a Republican congressperson, encourage them to join, and then one by one, there apparently is a list of Democratic congresspeople who are willing to be on the committee, but they are not going to be in balance. They really want to be a balanced committee.
Right, that's correct. That's absolutely correct. So they're looking for more Republicans. They have hundreds of Democrats who would get on it, but that would lose the whole gist of what it's about, is that there's Republican voices on it.
Yeah. So I'm continuing to look, and I want to remind people who could not hear, especially Dan's presentation, is that we're going to be sending you copies of all of this so that you can be fully informed. And let's see, is there anything else? Oh, what about direct actions going beyond call these reps? Well, I will let Christina talk about that. People want direct actions that go beyond calling these reps.
Well, I absolutely support that. I think it's sort of, I hate to borrow the bad term, but it's all of the above. We need direct action in addition to calling representatives. Dan talked about a lot of direct actions that people could specifically take in their communities and in their parishes. And he also talked about, and I mentioned a little bit, that there's ways to take direct actions as a church as well, both through more statements and by doing more that's energy related in a clean way to show that you're walking the walk and talking the talk. So my 2 cents is I completely and totally support direct action, whether that be marches or trying to get people involved in doing calls to members of Congress. I did see one question about are calls useful. Calls are the most useful thing into congressional offices. There's been a lot of work done and studies done on that, and that is the thing that they keep the greatest tallies on in congressional offices. And of course, they do care much more about constituents than non-constituents calling, but all of you are someone's constituent. And in general, what we hear all the time is that while the polls consistently show that the very big, vast majority of people in America care about these issues, they don't consider them a top priority. So in terms of the amount of calls and noise that members of Congress hear from their constituents, this is pretty low one generally.
Yeah. And every call you make, they count as like 1,000, I think. I forgot what the actual number is, but for every call they receive, they figure that 1,000 of their constituents care about it because it's such a low number of people that actually bother to do this. So moving on, there's another question in here about is there any progress on working with American bishops to vehemently support Laudato Si? And I always like to address this question, so I'm going to jump in here and do this. One of the things that people probably don't know, but maybe they need to know, is that right after Laudato Si was introduced in June of 2015, it's good to know that 110 of our U.S. bishops wrote letters of support, letters of to the editor, and op-eds in support of Laudato Si, or release statements. And those statements and op-eds and letters generated about 3,300 hits on the media about the bishops and Laudato Si. So they are not really silent, although in individual dioceses we may feel this way. The other thing that I think is important to know is that Dan mentioned that we are doing a pastoral training program. It's called Laudato Si in the Parish. And that program has just been piloted in 4 dioceses because we've heard the complaints. We never talk about this from the pulpit. Well, a lot of it is because, as I say, only in America is this a political issue, but people need information. So we piloted it in 4 dioceses this fall, and we are hoping to be in 10 more dioceses in the coming year, almost 1 a month. And then we'll do that program for at least 1 other year. But we hope to reach thousands of priests in the coming 3 years of this program that we have planned, and which we go in and we speak to them, not only about the issue itself, but also about how one can utilize care for creation as a backdrop for their homilies. So we've got a homiletics professor, we've got a Catholic social teaching professor, and we have someone who's talking about the issue of climate change. And then we also point them to resources. A lot of people just don't have a clue what to do. And not to be biased, but I would recommend that if you had not looked, that you go to the CatholicClimateCovenant.org site, because we have a resource that has over 1,000 resources that would help you. And all of them are free. And so we have tried to put these things together. And I think perhaps one of our most effective programs for people locally is our creation care teams. If you started a creation care team in your parish, not only would you have a vehicle by which to actually study the encyclical, and there's tons of guides to do that, but we send you once a month an email, if you're signed up as a creation care team leader, that gives you the blueprint for how to run a meeting. It has an opening prayer, it has an educational action, and it has an advocacy action. So these are all things that the church is doing in the name of church. And then the last is the one that Dan spoke about, our Catholic Covenant Energy Program. Not only are we encouraging dioceses to look and to benchmark how they can button up all of our buildings, and we're doing this one diocese at a time because of the structure of the church. It makes more sense to us. But we have a $2 million revolving loan fund that's going to make retrofitting and make the church carbon footprint, make the ability for us to reduce that be very, very possible. So these things take time. I think in church time, Laudato Si came on like gangbusters in a way that hardly any other encyclical can claim. It's not fast enough for those of us who are worried about the planet, but yet the bishops are not mute on this issue. There are things that they are doing. So people Somebody asked whether or not it would be a good idea to gather themselves regionally to form smaller CCC subgroups. And I would say that we don't have a vehicle for people doing that, but we could certainly provide you with resources to organize locally in your parishes or in your deaneries. So,
Maggie?
yeah. Yes,
I'm just going to go through some of the questions where people are asking for either more info or for a repeat. They want to know the date of the April March, and I guess I could tell them it's April 29th. They also wanted to know whether it was going to be only in DC, and the answer to that is no. It is probably going to have sister marches around the country as well as around the world. Another question that the name of the caucus again, the Congressional Bipartisan Climate Caucus, and they wanted to know
the Climate Solutions Caucus.
And then the last part that they were also trying to repeat was if they cannot attend the training, the legislative lobbying training that's going to be before the march, how can they get trained, how they can get resources. And I believe that we will be having a webinar, either March or April is the webinar, where we're going to do an advocacy training. And also on our website, there are resources for advocacy. So I would say that's two of the things. Christina, do you have any other ideas about how to learn about advocating, how to do legislative visits, things like that?
No, but I'll tell you this because I've done so much of this my whole life, and I've also done a lot of trainings for people before they make congressional visits. And I think that if you have training, it helps, but it's not necessary. The main thing is if you are somebody's constituent, they have to be interested in what you have to say. And if you speak from your heart and you speak directly, it will have an influence. So showing up and getting an appointment, saying you're a constituent, you want to come in and talk to a staff person or the member, ask for the member first and they'll say no, but it's good to do, is much, much better than not participating. So don't be overly concerned if you can't get the training. Having said that, if you can do training and you haven't done Hill visits or lobby visits in DC or in your district, by all means do it, but don't hold back without that. And just to make a really important point, every single member of Congress has a local office or sometimes many local offices in their districts and in their states. So it is not necessary that you come to DC. You can make phone calls to DC, but you can also make visits when the member is back in their state, and they usually come back and do town halls, do all sorts of things that are open to the public where you can go and be a person that raises this question again and again. And it will help influence them that, hey, when I was home in my state, 6 people did ask me about climate change. That hasn't ever happened before. And they will note that because I can't emphasize how much they pay attention more to constituents than anything else.
So, Paz, are you tracking other questions that we need to answer?
There was one question, and I think Christina can probably answer that, or maybe I can also. A question was, you gave us the name of these 3 senators, Murkowski, Graham, and Collins. How do people that don't live in those states communicate with them, since most of them have these web pages that if you're not from that state, they screen you out? Would it be through phone or snail mail?
By phone. And I think what you would, my advice is if you're not a constituent, to try to lead with the Catholic angle, that you know this person cares about people in the developing world, and that he and she are as a person of faith, and so are you, and you wanted to weigh in that way. So, and obviously I do understand, because I just said it before, that if you're not a constituent, it's going to, they rank the call in a different way when they take the call in the office than if you are a constituent. But I still think that would be a good thing. And that's something else just that perhaps Dan and your network will keep track of. when these issues are really up for votes in terms of appropriations, or when there's big moves or announcements saying we're going to gut and cut all climate funding through the UN or through USAID or through the GCF or whatever, just basically saying we're not going to be helping people in the developing world to adjust to this.
Given the time, Maggie, I'm thinking that we will answer any other questions via email.
Yes, that sounds like a plan. So thank you all. I want to remind you that if you are still online, that a webinar survey is going to appear on your screen. We ask you to please give us the opinion on the survey, because it helps us plan additional seminars. And a reminder, as it says on the screen before you, you can write us directly at info@catholicclimatecovenant.org, or you can find lots of resources available on our website, www.catholicclimatecovenant.org. Thank you, everyone.